live. So I see him a lot. I've known our speaker all my life. When he was born, his father and mother lived just, I don't know, maybe 20 feet from our house. We have another house there, so they used that for a while. So I am really privileged to have I feel really privileged to have Matthew here today. He will be a junior, right, at OSU this fall. So he's a fan of OSU. I see he's got to be on his deal here. So I'm happy that Matthew can be here too. May the Lord bless you, Matthew.
Thank you, and happy Sabbath, everyone. Really good to see all your guys' smiling faces out there this morning. Is the lapel mic's on? Good. Well, let me get set up here so we can get a PowerPoint going. Gotta love technology. Right. So yeah, as my grandpa kind of introduced me, my name's Matthew Hansen. I am going to be a junior at Oklahoma State University next fall. I hope there's not very many Sooner fans out there, and we'll have a pretty good morning. So I would think I was supposed to come last week. I actually took a trip to Phoenix to help my other grandparents move back here to Oklahoma, and we got stuck in Phoenix. So I didn't make it here. But I'm here this morning, and I'm happy to be here. So speaking of university, I took a speech class while I was there, and there are several rules we as speakers are supposed to follow. But every time I give this sermon, I always break one of those rules. One of the rules is that you're not supposed to just directly tell your audience exactly what you're going to talk about. But today I'm going to do just that. I'm going to introduce this sermon by telling you guys exactly what I'm going to talk about. So as you can see by the title of this sermon, it says Empowering Our Youth. Now I'm really happy we have a few kids here today, so this will be a great sermon for you guys. But empowering our youth, what does that mean? Well, we're going to look at some staggering statistics about the youth in our church today, about some of the membership in our church today, and then we're going to look into the Bible and see, okay, we can see these problems, we can see a few issues that we're experiencing. Now, where do we look to actually solve these issues? And so that's what we're going to look at today. So one of the first statistics that I have is talking about youth absency in Christianity as a whole. So this has to do with the whole Christian, not just the SDA denomination. But this was a survey taken a few years ago. It was taken in 2007 and 2017. And they asked, did you stop attending church regularly between the ages of 18 and 22? Now, when you look at the statistics, it actually shows some good news. In 2007, 70% of the people of the ages between 18 and 22 said that, yes, they did stop attending church regularly. But the number dropped to 66% in 2017. That is actually in a good trend, but we need to look a little bit closer. So let's look at SDA member absence in the church. It says 4 out of every 10 people end up leaving the SDA church. And although these numbers measure member absence as a whole, they still reflect an ongoing issue. And we'll get to that in a moment. So what about who in the SDA church is leaving in the biggest numbers? Well, when we look at this statistic, this that I found a few years ago, it says that under 18, we have 10% of those people under 18 are leaving. 18 to 29, we see 37%. So as a whole, the number of youth and young adults measures of 47% of the total amount of people that are actually leaving our church. So this is a chronic problem that we see in SDA churches today is, why are so many young people leaving? And it's very interesting to think about because the church that I come from, we have a Pathfinder club, and we have 30, 35 kids in this club, and it's an abundant number of kids. I mean, we have a really big club. But I am also the young adult coordinator there. And our young adult program, what we call ambassadors, we do good to get about 5 people there in a meeting. And so there's this disconnect between those age of the Pathfinders and those as young adults. The kids who are earning or are graduating out of their family, going to college, are also leaving the church. And why is that if we have so many people in Pathfinders, but then they're leaving? And what I've kind of narrowed it down to is what I like to call bridging the gap. And that is because there is kind of this disconnect between the ages of 16 and 18 where there really isn't anything to kind of keep those kids coming back in. And we'll get to that here in a moment. So speaking of Pathfinders and speaking of ambassadors and several other programs that we have, we need to look at, is there a correlation between that involvement and the people who are actually in retention? And so when we look at this, we can see that 72% of all inactive members did not have a leadership role while attending the church. Now this is pretty staggering because 72% is a big number, which basically would directly tell us that yes, the people who are not actively involved in a church, who maybe are just coming to church and going back home, are the same group of people that are leaving in bigger numbers than those who actually have responsibility or have some sort of involvement or some sort of connection with the church. We look at some more. 19% of all inactive members had a leadership role, and then of course there's that 8% that couldn't recall. So according to this survey, it would suggest that maybe there is a correlation between involvement and retention. So we think about, okay, we've kind of narrowed it down to, okay, who's leaving? Why are they leaving? Did they have a responsibility in the church? But what happened when these members were leaving? And so I found this survey of former inactive Adventist church members and to see, what did the church do to reach out to these people when they left? Well, it's pretty staggering again because 40% said that no one ever contacted them. They simply left, and that's it. And the church that I go to, Edmond, I see this a lot. There's a lot of members, not necessarily members, but visitors who will come for a few weeks, and they kind of slip in between the cracks. You see them, you're aware that they're there, but no one ever really reaches out to them. They're there for a few weeks, and then they're gone, and you never see them again. And those are the kind of members, or people that are, who were in the church, who are kind of just, slipping in between that we need to be paying more attention to. And so you go down this list here, and you can see that 19% said that a church member did come to visit. 17%, maybe a local elder. It's got all kinds of information on there. 10% a family member. 9% a pastor came to visit. And, when I talk about this, I get this a lot. Oh, well, we don't have enough time, or we have a lot of excuses, and I totally understand that. As someone who is active in the church, it can be very stressful. And I know that our pastors are really, really overworked. So when it comes to making sure that we're making connections with each individual church member, it is an uphill battle. It is an up-climbing battle, and it's tough. It is really, really tough. So why are youth specifically leaving? And I know this image is a little bit blurry, so I'll read it to you. But the number that I really wanted to focus in on was the 29% that did not feel connected to the people in their church. And I believe this comes back to more of the involvement. Okay, what is that gap that we see? Well, we looked at that 16 to 18 age range where kids really don't have a role in the church. They graduate out of Pathfinders. They're kind of living with their parents, going through the high school years, but there's really nothing keeping them there. And then they kind of go to college and they get life going and they're busy, and the next thing you know, well, church is the last thing that they're thinking about. And so that is something that, you go to church, and as a young person, if I go to church and I've got all these other things going on and all these other conflicting life responsibilities, and I'm not feeling the connection, what's really drawing me in? We can look at some of these other numbers too. The top one was I moved to college and stopped attending church. I see this a lot, especially when I went to college. There's a lot of kids who were, going to church, and then as soon as they moved to college and away from their family, they just quit going. And so that there's some debate of why that is. But the next one is church members served were judgmental or hypocritical, which is we could do a whole nother sermon on that, just that sentence alone. And then your bottom two would be I disagreed with the church stance on political issues, and my work responsibilities prevented me from attending. And if you look at these numbers, it goes 34, 32, 29, 25, and 34. So they're all fairly close together. So there's a variety of reasons why youth are leaving. But for the purpose of this sermon, I want to focus in on the 29% that didn't feel connected to their church. So we've kind of identified the problem. We've kind of identified why kids are leaving. Now, how do we solve this problem as a church? Okay, how do we make that connection? How do we bridge the gap? How do we maybe give more responsibility to these kids? And how do we minister to these people? How do we guide our youth and our young adults? So what can we as a church do to guide our youth down the right path? Well, the first place I love to look is the Bible. If we're looking to solve any problem, the first place you want to look is the Bible, because almost every time basically has all the answers that we need. And so the first chapter that I kind of ran across was John chapter 14, 6 through 7. I'll read it to you. It says, Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. So it all begins with our own relationship with Jesus. How do we bring someone in if we ourselves never have that relationship to begin with? And so in this context, Jesus is kind of comforting his disciples, because the disciples are like, Jesus, well, how are we supposed to bring people in? And Jesus says, through me. You can bring others in through me. We can keep our youth coming to the church through me. That's what Jesus is saying here. He says, but if we have a relationship with Jesus, are we not also his disciples? If we know Jesus, we know his Father. If we have a relationship with Jesus, we have the ability to share that with others. So, to reiterate it again, it all begins with Jesus. And if anyone has ever heard me speak before, you know that in basically any of my sermons that I will give, I always mention Jesus, because the whole concept of the Bible from beginning to end revolves around what Jesus did and what he is going to do. And so how can we retain and empower our young people today? Well, our next answer can be found in the next chapter, John 15, 5 through 6. And it says, remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So by having a personal relationship with Christ and sharing that relationship with others, how can we share our fruits if we have no vine? You know, I grow a big garden every year. I'm a huge gardener. We can talk about gardening all the time. And if I never grew, my squash plant, how could I get that squash? And how would I take that squash and give it to someone else? Which, by the way, I meant to bring some today, but I forgot. But the same concept is here. If we're trying to guide our young people, but we have no fruit to give, how are we supposed to help retain that? And so it really begins with kind of our inner relationship and what our relationship is with Jesus and how we can bring that to help guide others. And so in other words, how can we build others up in Jesus? Develop relationship with others and hope to empower others if we ourselves don't have a relationship with Jesus. And so I know we've unraveled a lot of information, so I'll take this moment to kind of go over our thoughts so far. And so it's very difficult to lead someone somewhere if you have never been there to begin with. And what I really love to illustrate when I come to this slide is imagine that you're driving somewhere and you have someone following you, okay? But you have never been there. You know no information of how to get there, but you're expected to lead this person to from point A to point B. How difficult would it be to do that? If you've never been there, you have no knowledge of being there. It would be really, really, really difficult, right? It'd be incredibly difficult to go from point A to point B on that basis. But fortunately, we have GPS today. But as a Christian, our Bible can be our GPS. And so when it comes to guiding others, we have guidelines and we have a way to get there. In other words, by having a relationship with Jesus, we have the knowledge and the know-how. And even if we may not be there or we're a little unsure, we always have our GPS right here to consult. I'll just pick that up. So In other words, the Bible is our GPS, and Jesus is our navigator. And if we have a GPS or know our navigator, how can we lead ourselves or others to salvation? In this case, encourage our youth, guide them, lead them, encourage them to stay active and keep developing a relationship with Jesus. And so once we have that relationship with Jesus, how can we build a relationship with others? So we've kind of delved into our personal life. We've looked inner, and we have that relationship with Jesus. We're like, okay, Jesus, now what do I need to do next? How can I make a difference to help retain more people in my church? Well, in this context, in Romans 14, I'll read this real quick. 14 verse 19 says, "Let us therefore make every effort to do what lends to peace and mutual edification." So in this context, Paul is talking about the relationship between the strong and the weak. If you continue to read through verse 20 and 23, Paul warns us about condemning others based on their practices. In this case, instead of condemning one another, let us build each other up. And I'll give you guys a classic example. And so when I studied this chapter with Pastor TJ at our other church, we kind of talked about, okay, let's say we sit down at a table and we eat with someone, okay, someone who is a non-believer for this example, and they're eating something that we might not necessarily agree with. Okay, there are two ways that we can do this. We can say, you're not supposed to be eating that. That's wrong. And they may say, well, this is how I'm going to eat it, and they may clam up instantly, and that may be the end of the conversation. Or you can say, what are you eating? And they can tell you and say, oh, okay. And then if they offer, you say, no, I'm okay. I believe this, and this. And then maybe they'll get curious, and they'll be like, oh, well, why do you believe this way? And you guys can have a little bit more conversation. Rather than just instantly condemning them for what they're eating, show a little bit of grace and a little bit of kindness and slowly work your way into that. And that is a very, very good way to have a little bit of more civilized conversation. So the next one is accept everyone for who they are. And this can be found in Romans 15. It says, accept one another then, just as Christ accepted you, in order to bring praise to God. When we talk about salvation, we talk about our paths through life. Everyone's path is different. Everyone's path to salvation is different. It's really hard to put salvation into like a 7-step program and say, these are the steps that you need to do to be saved. In some cases, yes, that may be the case. And if you look in the Bible, yes, there are many steps that we can take. But those steps may be in different orders considering where you are in your life. And so it's important to realize that when we're interacting with others, especially our youth and young adults, and even, just everyone in the church. And so I really wish I could quote all of chapter 15 here, but Romans 15 is all about accepting everyone just as Jesus did. Paul also writes about building each other up. So everyone's path to redemption looks different. Everyone's purpose in life is different. As followers of Christ, it is our job to accept everyone and build them up. So, to wrap all that up, if I had to sum it up into 3 words, we just need Jesus. Amen. When we are working with others, when we are working in our church, the number one thing is to remember is to have faith in Jesus. I was talking to a fellow young adult coordinator a couple weeks ago, and we were kind of talking, a little bit about our struggles and some of the pains that we're having with kind of keeping a young adult ministry going. And one of the things he told me was, you just need to leave it in Jesus' hands. Do what you can, and Jesus will do the rest. And that really, really spoke to me because there's a lot of times where there are a lot of things that are not in our control. But if we put that in Jesus' hands, he can help us. He can not only guide us, but he can help us get there. And so for our youth, for our young people in here, I say, stay active in the church. Do not let others dictate your life, and keep growing with Jesus. Keep on that narrow path. And now moving on to our scripture reading, 1 Timothy 4 through 12, it says, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, conduct, in love, in faith, and purity. Young people, you have a voice. Do not let anyone look down on you. Know your actions and examples speak loudly. Know that you do have a voice. I did really enjoy how we talked about a little bit about witnessing today in Sabbath school. Because growing up, I went to a public high school, And I was really involved with my high school. I played basketball, I did track, I did all these different things. But the only catch was a lot of those events happened on Friday nights and Saturdays. And I never really made a big deal about this. I just said, you know what, I'll participate in what I can, and I'll just sit the rest of them out. Well, unbeknownst to me, I had tons of questions. People were like, why do you only go to this and not this? And why are you even on the team if you can't go to all the games? And why are you doing this? And they asked all these questions. And it was that witnessing opportunity for me to explain, well, I keep the Sabbath, I'm a Christian, and this is what I believe, and this is my faith, and here, let me show you. And it was a great experience. It was tough. I won't say it wasn't challenging at times. It was very challenging, but it was a great witnessing tool. And so it goes back to this, but just be a good example of speech, conduct, and love, and faith, and purity. And so you can overcome anything with Jesus. And I love this verse here in 1 John. It says, you, dear children, are from God, and have overcome them, because the one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world. I know for many of our youth and young adults, there are lots of challenges, that we face. And it's always an uphill battle, especially because our walk with Christ is kind of just beginning. We're just in those first initial steps, but we also want to inflict change. We want to affect change within the church. We have big ideas, and it can be challenging to make that connection with some of our fellow elders and with the youth. And so when we come up on these challenges, it's important to remember that God is with us, and because he who is in us is bigger than those who are in the world. Now, in this context, it's important to note that John is talking about all the children of God here. But you could also take this as literally children, but it doesn't actually mean literally children. We are all children of God. And so youth have different challenges in their faith than adults, and adults have different challenges in youth. And so it's important that we know that with Jesus, you can overcome these challenges and be a great example for others to follow. And so youth, you have resources. I always like to pull this up because there are many resources that we have today for young adults to get involved. And so Pathfinders is a great way to connect with your church. I see several kids in here. Pathfinders is an excellent way to get something going. Adventist Christian Fellowship, it's on campuses. These days we have one at OSU. We're small, but we are still there. There are many young adults and youth programs offered here in the church. And if you have any questions about many more programs, just talk to me after the service. So church, support our youth. Youth, stay connected. We just have to stay connected to continue to build that relationship, continue to foster fellowship, continue to walk with Jesus. And again, it all begins with Jesus. Develop a relationship with him, share the great news, build relationships, and stay connected. Thank you, guys.